This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Tonight, we're going to explore the power of codified learning with my guest, Bruce Robertson. Something we are really excited to look at and see how it has taken education by storm over the last few years. So sit back, relax, grab a drink on this summer's evening as we explore this topic.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. It is Friday, the 7th of June, and I am your host, James Radburn. I'm thrilled for you to be with us this evening, especially with football and the politics and everything else that's going on this week. But sat down and listening to this, which is going to be a very rich conversation. Now, I'm thrilled to be joined by Bruce Robertson, who is a head teacher from Scotland today. Give us a real context about what he has done over the last years within school. And he's got some very interesting insights into education, and has written several books on the matter as well. Now, under his guidance, his schools and what he has done is really got innovative approaches to this idea of teaching and learning. And his impact reaches far beyond his own school as well. And what we're going to really explore is this idea of moving education theory with real-world application. And it's made him a really sought-after educator. So we'll discuss some key themes about the role of codified learning. What does that actually mean? Okay, this idea of tick sheet mentality, teacher autonomy, and student outcomes as well. So, welcome, Bruce. How are you this evening?
Hi, James. Good evening. I'm really good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, it's been one of those weeks. I think a teacher says that every Friday, don't they? They say one of those weeks, but I think it was coupled with I was teaching three maths lessons with about 15 teachers watching me. But last night, my son decided to keep throwing up all over me. Avoided my wife, avoided his clothes, but just me. So I've had one of those days, I think, as well.
How is he now? Is he better?
Yeah, he's better. He's in bed, which is good. I've got 3 of them. 2 of them are asleep. Hopefully the other one will get there soon. So, really be interesting, Bruce, to give us a little bit more context about your education journey. And I think that's really key to some of the ideas that you have got and things that we're going to really unpack today. So yeah, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I trained as a teacher in 2002, 2003, a chemistry teacher. I did my probationary period in the southeast of Scotland, in East Lothian. I then moved to the Scottish borders as a chemistry teacher in 2007 to a school called Berwickshire High School. So I taught there for 5 years before I was appointed as deputy head teacher at Eyemouth High School, also in the Scottish borders. My remit focused on teaching and learning, and that's what I was working with staff on for about 7 years as the deputy. And then I was appointed head teacher of Berwickshire High School, which is the school that I'd been the chemistry teacher in all these years before. I was appointed the head teacher of Berwickshire High School in August 2020. So in the middle of COVID, the school had really quite a poor inspection the year before. Head teacher had stood down, and then what we were tasked with was really turning the school around, which we've had a huge amount of success with.
Wow. August 2020. I think we can all think back to that time of COVID, and people talk about losing COVID years. That must have been quite a tough gig to get it at that time.
So yes, I remember my second day. My first day was working with staff and setting out my vision, what our vision would be, the focus that we were going to have on teaching and learning. But then the next day, when students were in the school, leading 18 assemblies that day, the same message over and over and over, because with COVID and social distancing, I was not able to have more than 50 students in the assembly hall at the same time. So it was a full day's worth of assemblies, but really important for students to be introduced to me, for me to set out the direction that the school was going to go in. So yeah, a really, really strange time for everybody.
And I think something that kind of relates really nicely to what you just said, that message over and over again. And I think that's going to be a theme that comes through this. And something I've done recently across our schools, our family of schools, because I work across a MAT within Worcestershire area, is that we implemented a big project of one-to-one iPads, and we just shared the same message again and again and again. And I bet, do you think that culture element of it is how you made so much change within your own school? And what do you think, what value do you have on that element, getting it right from that day one, that has meant you set a really good foundation to grow?
Definitely an important part of it. Simplicity, as simple as possible, but not simpler. That's the Einstein principle. Clarity in the message, and then the focus on teaching and learning. These have all been key. Yeah, the simplicity, the clarity, and the focus on teaching and learning. It's not rocket science. A lot of school leaders do talk about the importance of teaching and learning, and the continuous focus on that. But to what extent do their actions actually link to that? To what extent do they actually prioritize things so that the continuous improvement of teaching and learning is the number one aim? I'm not sure that as many schools are really doing that as maybe think that they are.
And that's interesting. I wrote down this simple and clarity. And they talk about comedians. Comedians are very intelligent because they notice and they make things appear simple and take it back at us. And I think we may be guilty in education, and particularly schools, where we overcomplicate things. Do you think there's a little bit of that element in it? And that's why schools may not be looking at themselves enough in some ways, and that clarity actually, you're putting it so eloquently and so like, oh yeah, right, okay, I need to be simple about my 3 things I want to implement about teaching and learning, or vice versa. But actually getting to that simplicity and that clarity takes time.
I think so. Certainly when you're setting something out for the first time, I think it's quite important to keep it simple so that there is some clarity. And then it's like this idea of moving from novice to expert, isn't it? As people become more and more expert in an area, as their understanding develops, well, then that's when the nuance comes in. But to begin with, as a starting point, let's keep it simple. My own background as a chemistry teacher, let's use the analogy of the structure of an atom. That model where you've got the nucleus in the middle with the neutrons and the protons and the electrons going around. That's a really simple model, and it's not entirely accurate, but it is useful to help give a basic understanding of the structure of an atom. As you learn more about atomic structure, as you learn more about chemistry, well, you discover it's far more complicated than that, but there's no way you could have started at that point. So you need to build up.
Yeah, definitely. And I had a conversation with a Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 computer science teacher recently. We said what we would teach in early years in Key Stage 1 in England, very much about what an algorithm is, so step-by-step instructions. Actually, that analogy and that simplicity does grow over time and what it looks like. And I think that is a really important thing. What are those foundational principles that you want that will set you up for success?
100%. So one of the first things that I did as the new head teacher was I created a new position, which is called Principal Teacher of Pedagogy. And a member of staff was appointed to this role. They're 4 days a week off timetable, non-teaching, and 1 day a week teaching. That gives them an awful lot of time to focus on professional development with staff. But yesterday, as part of a showcase day, which we were holding at Berwickshire High School, and we had around 40 or 50 delegates from across Scotland came to visit us to find out about our approaches to professional learning, pedagogy, curriculum, assessment, behaviour. He was talking about that address that I'd given to staff on day one and how I'd set out my stall that the focus needed to be on teaching and learning. And he said that at that point he thought, well, obviously it's teaching and learning. But then he quickly realised that for all the school had been talking about that in the past, that's not really what it had been focusing on. A lot of talk about it, but no real action. And everything that we do now is really designed to help and to support teachers and school leaders to get better and better and better at what we do. We talk so often about a mindset of continuous improvement. And to go back to your point, James, we keep repeating that message. And alongside that, to say that the idea of getting better and talking about getting better, it's not criticism. It's just about it links to the importance of the job that we do. We're in the business of transforming lives, and it's just so important that we all just keep working together to get better and better and better, so that the experiences and the outcomes for young people do the same.
And we are in a job where we just need to continuously keep going, and there is lots of ebbs and flows, cohorts, teachers coming in and out, but also external factors that we can't control. And the life of a school and the life of things do ebb and flow. And it is really interesting in terms of that. And so talking and thinking about this idea of the continuous improvement, there's been a real push, in particular that I've seen within England, and I know I've had some talks with educators in America as well, and it's coming to the forefront of what I'm calling codified teaching. And by that means we are finding, to help with that simplicity and with that clarity, that actually what is teaching and what is those elements that make up good teaching. But I think before we go into that and we explore that trend, I think it starts with this idea of, when we say teaching and learning, let's explore this learning. And I wondered if you could give us a little bit of your insight into a crash course of learning, what learning is. Because I know Craig Barton, many of you may follow him on social media and see the work that he does. He wrote that a teacher not considering how their students think and learn is like a doctor not overly concerned about the workings of the body, or a baker taking only a casual interest in the best conditions for bread to rise. And I think as an educator, we really need to dive deep into these things about what is the science, what is the research. And we've seen a massive shift over the last few years in that way. But I wonder if you give us a little bit of a context about learning, from your perspective, what you see about it, and help us as educators understand that. And then we can talk a little bit about afterwards where that trend has come and why actually we're seeing more of this codified learning.
I use that quote all the time. I'm working with teachers and school leaders. I think I know it off by heart now. I think it's a brilliant quote. Also, when I work with teachers and school leaders, I tend to ask the question, what is learning? And we use show me boards a lot when I'm working with teachers and school leaders. So it's really, really interesting to find what people write or draw on show me boards. Very few of the teachers and school leaders who I work with put down anything to do with working memory, with long-term memory. Very few of them put down anything that's really to do with key messages from cognitive science about what learning is and how it happens. And until relatively recently in my career, I wouldn't have done that either, because I've never been taught anything really about cognitive science. The whole way through teacher training, through my probationary period, all the years that I worked in a classroom, nobody had really pushed me to consider that question, what is learning and how does it happen? And it was really by accident when I stumbled across the book, Why Don't Students Like School by Daniel T. Willingham, that really opened my eyes to this topic. So when I work with teachers and school leaders now, I do talk about this idea, a crash course in learning. We explore various learning lessons together. The first learning lesson for me is a definition. Learning is the development of long-term memory through the accumulation of knowledge. And that's all to do with long-term memory being effectively a knowledge store. We store declarative knowledge, that's of facts and concepts. We store procedural knowledge, that's knowledge of how to do things, which we can't necessarily articulate. And the idea that when we think in working memory, when we make sense of any new information that's coming to our attention, we're using what we have stored in our long-term memory to make sense of that. And the more that we have stored and the better organized that store is in relation to what we're seeing and hearing, well, the better we can think about it, the better we understand it. So that's really what, for me, that first learning lesson is all about. And then I kind of go on to say, well, we learn what we think about. And it's this idea that to get the transfer of information from working memory and into long-term memory, well, the best bet is to get people to think about it. The more we think about things and the harder we think about them, the more likely we are to get that transfer from working memory into long-term memory. And learning is the development of long-term memory. So that's the first couple of learning lessons.
Yeah, and it's this idea very much of pupils thinking hard, isn't it? The fact that this concept of when I go into classes, when I go in support or when I'm going to go in teaching, the question I ask myself, and there was a conversation I was having with some teachers this morning with them, which is what is learning, but actually what are the children to think about? What are the key bits of that procedural knowledge and this idea that we want to get into their working memory so they can use now, but also build into that long-term memory and code it so it can really go into depth. Let's explore some of those other key elements of learning after a word from our sponsors.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the three-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
So, I'm just really thinking about something you said a few minutes ago, and it was this idea that engaging with research, engaging with this cognitive science. So why do you think then there has been much more of a focus on this engaging with this simple model of the mind and these core umbrella terms about codifying learning, and so we can talk about it. Why do you think there's been a massive push over the last few years with this approach that we haven't necessarily had prior, or even when I trained, or when you trained, for example?
I'll answer that just now, James. Once I've finished this answer, could we come back to the idea of desirable difficulties as well? Because I've got something I'd like to share with you on that. But
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, thanks. In answer to that question, well, I think it's really because of the explosion of books and the use of EduTwitter, for example, that's just really helped bring this to the attention of a much wider audience. So publishers like John Catt Educational, for example, and the accessibility of the books that they produce, they're really high quality. You were quoting from Craig Barton. I was referring to Daniel T. Williams, Why Don't Students Like School? More and more schools are becoming aware of books like that. More and more schools are investing in their own professional reading libraries, setting up professional reading and discussion groups. EduTwitter is helping to share these things with a much wider audience. So I think people a lot of these books didn't exist, actually. At the time that I trained, certainly, if you go back to 2002, 2003, the books that we're talking about, well, they're much later than that, aren't they? They're 10, 15 years after that. So some of it just wasn't there, but even when it was there, it wasn't being widely shared. But now it is, and I think once teachers start to read about some of this stuff and it's presented to them, I think it fires them up. I think they think, yeah, that really makes sense. And now actually, the decisions that I'm making in my lesson planning and in my delivery of lessons, well, I can be thinking about some of the concepts, some of the theory that I now know about learning and how it happens, and my decisions can be based on that. They can help guide and inform my decision making.
And I think that access to information and high quality information, as you say, with books or presentations, and we'll talk a little bit later about how research into practical and the balance between that, because some of this can be research of the past. It's been very theoretical, but not necessarily practical implementation and application into the classroom itself. And I think that's a really core balance. And we'll come on to that, because I think that's a whole conversation in itself that we can have. But yeah, tell me about this idea of desirable difficulties then in relation to this in the crash course of learning and the ideas and that element.
So last week, Professor Lindsay Patterson from the University of Edinburgh came to visit Berwickshire High to find out about the school's approach to professional development, the focus on pedagogy and curriculum. And as part of that, he met with a small group of staff and he met with a small group of students. And one student, who I think was 13 or 14 years old, said to Professor Patterson that school should be fun. And I'm just quoting now from an email that I received from Professor Patterson afterwards. He said, when I pressed them on this, one very thoughtful boy said that fun meant the satisfaction of learning difficult things, and added that a good teacher was one who helped you to overcome your frustration with difficulties. Then a girl commented further, when the conversation moved into group work, that working with others was satisfying only when it dealt with difficult things. The best way to learn, she wisely added, was to have to explain it to other people. So when we're talking about the importance of thinking and pitching thinking at the right level, not too easy so that students get frustrated, not too difficult so that they give up. Well, this was really this idea of desirable difficulties was really borne out in the conversation with Professor Patterson. Students were saying that themselves, that things do need to be desirably difficult for them to want to engage with them. That's motivating. That helps to make things interesting.
And it's And I like this idea that you use the word motivated there, because if you get that right, children will want to be enthusiastic. They will want to go and explore. They're going to be naturally inquisitive. And that's kind of one of our core aims as educators. Is I don't like this idea of people talk about jobs for the future. What I'd rather talk about is like, what are the skills and that core-based knowledge we want children to have for the future? And so things like critical thinking, being inquisitive, being motivated to learn or find things out, or knowing how to do that, they're going to be the stuff that set children up for life. And if you go and look at children with resilience in a classroom, if they don't get something first time, they know what to do, they know how to call on people and have that self-reflection. I think that is a really important element. And I really like this idea of, we've done a lot in recent years with talking to pupils about their learning and letting them have a voice. I think maybe in the past we were too scared of that. We were unsure of what children were going to say, and not necessarily putting them on the pedestal that actually they are confident, they are articulate, and we just need to have those high expectations for them so they can articulate some wonderful things like you heard just there. So that, you must be really proud of the work that's gone into your school and the stuff you've done and with the children for them to come out with something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Particularly from some of our younger students as well. And just to pick up on some of what you said there, James, I agree with you. There is a difference between being useful and being interesting. I think a lot of what young people learn at school should be useful to them, but not everything has to be useful. Some of the learning that I think is so important in school is learning that's just interesting. I loved science at school, for example. My own subject, as I said, is chemistry. Other than teaching it, not much of the chemistry that I learned has been particularly useful to me on a day-to-day basis. I do find it really, really interesting, and it fires me up. So it's not just useful that should be the driver for what we're teaching students in school. That should certainly be a consideration and part of it, but interesting as well.
And it's really interesting seeing, like my own son, my oldest is in year 1, and you can tell the way he asks questions and the way he's interested in elements of science and how things work, and he wants to know to that level or depth of understanding. And he, like, at bedtime tonight, he was asking about Vikings, and then my wife said about them invading, and he was like, what does invaded mean? And like, he's really passionate and interested, and in 2 or 3 days time he'd come up with another question or something else, and we get to a stage of, okay, we need to go and explore this in a little bit more depth. You've gone beyond my knowledge now, and I love that. I love that when children challenge your knowledge as a teacher, and you have to go on this journey with them. And I think that's the magic sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. We have a rationale for our curriculum in Berwickshire High School, and it's got 5 points to it. And the 5th point is, I think, probably the most important one. It's to love learning for the sake of learning, viewing it as interesting and exciting.
Definitely. What I think about this, another phrase that I think you used earlier and I use quite a lot, and I think I don't think it's our phrase. I think it may be Dylan William, but please correct me if I'm wrong. It's the idea of best bets in education. And I think, how do you think this role of codifying teaching and teaching practices, how has that helped us as professionals have a shared language over the best bets that will improve teaching and learning? And from your experience as a head as well, how is being able to solidify, this is what learning is? How has that supported the professional development and that idea of making sustained, improved outcomes, just not only for the staff, but also consequently the children as well?
You've got me thinking about where the best bets quote comes from. Dylan William uses it a lot, I know. I don't think it was him that coined it, actually. I need to go back and have a look at that one.
I know. I've written that down as one of my follow-up points and questions now. But it is, and I think that when we come on to talk about research later, it is that what are the best bets? Because not everything is going to be relevant in the classroom, but this idea of codifying these common terms and common language is useful. That's what we're exploring, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it might have been Lee Elliott Major, and it's Steve Higgins. I think that's maybe who coined the phrase. Anyway, that's what you've got me thinking about. That's what my working memory's churning over just now, James. But to come back to codifying teaching, if we go back in time to where Berwickshire High School was, I think it's a good example of a school when it was inspected. The inspection was really quite damning in terms of the quality and the consistency of learning and teaching that was taking place across the school. Fast forward to when the school was re-inspected in November 2021, and the inspection letter to parents says that the quality and the consistency of learning and teaching has improved considerably across the school. Teachers now have a much stronger shared understanding of what high quality teaching and learning looks like. We got to that point through a form of codifying. We produced together as a staff collaboratively a two-sided framework that we call a lesson evaluation toolkit, which maps out the features of a typically high quality lesson. We built it together. There are particular elements, as we call them, like daily review, learning intentions, success criteria, questioning, feedback to students. And then there are illustrations that add just a little bit of detail to each element. So if we take daily review, the illustration would say low stakes assessment, promoting retrieval practice from everyone. Includes material required for the lesson, recent and less recent material. That came from staff. We talked about what the typical features of a high quality lesson are, and we agreed together what we would put into this framework. This helps teachers when it comes to planning lessons, when it comes to delivering lessons, when it comes to thinking back over lessons, when it comes to talking about lessons with a colleague perhaps who's observed the lesson. It gives us a shared language. It gives us reminders about the sorts of things that we should be thinking about. It is a checklist, but it's not a tick list. And I think that distinction is just so important. A tick list is obviously something where you tick something off, or you cross it happened or it didn't happen. But that's not what this document is. This document is a checklist which is designed to help promote critical thinking and discussion. So when you're a teacher planning a lesson, and periodically you're referring to this lesson evaluation toolkit, and the more you use it, the more it becomes committed to long-term memory and the less you actually have to refer to it. You know that typically there should be a daily review in a lesson. Should that be at the start of the lesson? Maybe. Makes sense. Doesn't have to be. It's not that prescriptive. But it is saying typically in a lesson, it's a good idea to have daily review, and these are the sorts of features to consider when you're planning that. It's that toolkit then that's really helped to build a shared understanding about what makes effective teaching across the school, and has helped to develop that consistency. And I think it strikes a really strong balance between consistency and preserving autonomy. Staff would say that as well, because it's giving high-level pointers, but then the specific execution of that, well, that's completely up to teachers.
I'm really glad you said that, because I've been having this conversation recently, and we're going to come back onto this idea of how have you implemented it so it is that checklist has that autonomy within it. But going back to this high-level element, and go back to this idea of learning, you take something, let's say a common phrase of like check for understanding, or it could be, like, as you say, daily review. there are multiple ways of doing that. Whether it is the domain you're working in, it'd be different in chemistry, that would be in PE, that would be in another subject like music, for example, both at secondary and primary and all the way through. And also check for understanding, like you said, it could be a show me board, it could be a quick question, it could be an individual on a process. And I think, don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's been a bit of a muddying of water between these tick lists, that you can see lots and lots of strategies out there, but not also this holistic understanding of what is learning. And we've got to step back a little bit and think about those core principles of learning, of discussion, of questioning, of how we present and how we give feedback. And I think there have been schools that may have focused too much on the granular and made it into a tick sheet. Do you think that's kind of a bit of a fair representation of what you've seen at other schools and other teachers you've talked to?
It's definitely easy for something like the lesson evaluation toolkit that I'm talking about to mutate. The phrase lethal mutation, that's used quite a lot. I think that one can be attributed to Dylan William. These sorts of tools are very easy. They can go wrong very easily. When I was the deputy head in Eyemouth High School, leading teaching and learning, this was the first time that as a staff we created something like this. And it was incredibly useful to us. And then other schools, they started to learn about what we were doing, and they came to visit. And in the best examples, what they then did was they went off and they built their own version as a school. And they used it in the same way, as a checklist, not a tick list, an aid to help support lesson planning and discussion, etc. In the worst examples, what a school did was just took the Eyemouth High School one. One deputy head in a school that I know actually just Tipp-X'd out Eyemouth High School on it and wrote the name of their school on it, and then said to the staff, right, this is what we're using now.
Wow.
And then actually, it got stuck to clipboards. And then members of the senior leadership team would walk into lessons and just start ticking things off or crossing them off. And then they would send a pretty unpleasant email to the teacher saying, here's your feedback. And that's not how it should be used at all. That's a disastrous way to use something like this. But if you go about it in the right way, which is to co-construct it as a staff, if you're using it to support a discussion based on an observed lesson, for example, and I think language matters. So in Berwickshire High, we try not to talk about lesson observation feedback. We try to talk about meetings to discuss a lesson. So let's say I've observed a lesson. I'll ask the teacher if they could complete their own self-evaluation using our toolkit. And then we'll agree to meet pretty soon afterwards. We'll sit down and I'll say, well, talk me through your self-evaluation. So they're using the same framework that I've been using to think about the lesson, and it helps guide our conversation. We're thinking about the same sorts of things, and the conversation can become pretty rich. And actually, because everybody in the school is using this lesson evaluation toolkit, it wouldn't really matter if it was me observing the lesson, if it was a deputy head, somebody else. Chances are the conversation is going to go in a pretty similar direction. Whereas if you don't have something like this, what will often happen is that depending on who observes the lesson and who's having the meeting with you, it can go in a completely different direction. And that's what had been going on in Berwickshire High School previously. And I can think of more than one teacher who was, sort of head in their hands type moment saying, I'm just so confused. I just don't know what I should be doing anymore. I don't know if it should be more teacher-led or if it should be more student-led. Somebody tells me there should be more group work and somebody tells me there should be less. I just don't know what to do.
Yeah, I remember having feedback myself, and you obviously, the next time they come and see you, which was 3-4 months' time, you over-ebb that and showcase it. Maybe like modelling, you didn't something about my modelling in a lesson. Okay, right, I'm going to work on that. I'm going to do something in the next lesson. Time they come in 3-4 months later, over-ebb that bit. They're like, well, that's not relevant in this bit, and it wasn't a clear language, and it wasn't co-constructed. It was very much felt like them and us kind of thing, and no one knew what teaching or learning was, it felt like. Right. And I think that is where the danger comes, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And if we just take that example of the element we've been discussing, daily review, that's there as a result of a really strong evidence base to do with cognitive science, learning and how it happens. The idea that when students retrieve memories from long-term memory, well, not only is that useful to the teacher in a formative sense, because it helps to give them an idea of what students have in their long-term memory and what they have understood or learned, but it's utilizing the testing effect, the principle that retrieval strengthens memory. So daily review, in the illustration, it says low stakes assessment, promoting retrieval practice from everyone. So it's about active recall. If you don't have something like this, you may or may not have a daily review. Often in schools, lessons will begin with a starter activity, but actually that's not an activity that involves anything active. I mean, active in the cognitive sense, I mean, as in thinking, I mean, as in retrieval. It's more of what I call a being busy activity. And that's why I think it's really quite important to make clear what we're trying to get at with an activity like daily review, and the lesson evaluation toolkit helps to do that.
One final question before I play the news, and it comes back to this: how do you break down that perception that it isn't a checklist? Because you're going to have, yes, you build your culture and you've got people on your way that you are co-constructing this, but you're also always going to have teachers who are scarred by lasting experiences, also new teachers coming in as well. And so how do you break that perception that this isn't a checklist, this is almost a conversation starter to have about education and have about what teaching and learning can look like in the classroom?
So teachers in Berwickshire High School had definitely had that bad experience previously. Actions speak louder than words, so it's about how middle and senior leaders in the school actually go about using something like this. I said to you that language does matter. For all actions speak louder than words, language matters. So meetings to discuss lessons, talk me through your self-evaluation, using the framework in that way. People quickly can see how useful that is to help guide the conversation. The conversation becomes richer. Actually, what can be quite frustrating to teachers is if somebody observes a lesson and then there's no conversation about the lesson, or almost as bad, the person who's leading the conversation doesn't really offer anything useful. So the lesson evaluation toolkit helps to improve the quality of conversations. And I don't think there's a single member of staff in Berwickshire High School who would say that they don't find it useful in that way. There's definitely nobody who would say, well, this is just being used as a tick list. This is a quality assurance tool. It's a checking up on us. It's absolutely not that. And it's just all about how school leaders go about using it.
Excellent. Here's a little bit from our news for this week, and I will be back with Bruce very shortly, where we will go and explore this idea of novices, experts, how you can take some of these ideas, implement them within your own school, and where you'd start as a leader as well. So sit back and have a listen.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easy4u.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the three-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
With the general election approaching, some political parties have already turned their attention to education. All major media outlets have covered Labour's plans to add VAT to private school fees and the Conservatives' comments on increasing apprenticeships by getting rid of rip-off degrees. However, the BBC features a story on proposals by the Lib Dems to increase taxes on social media giants as well as companies such as Amazon and Google. The revenue raised, the party says, would then be used to fund mental health professionals for all England state schools. The tax itself already exists and is known as the Digital Services Tax, but the Liberal Democrats say they would triple the amount the companies paid in it. Recent NHS statistics reported by the BBC show nearly 340,000 children and young people are currently on waiting lists to access mental health services in England. In response, the Conservatives said they'd already increased training places for mental health nurses, while Labour said it would put mental health support in every school. In Teesside, the BBC Tees News website reports on Nigerian students seeking help from a food charity. An economic crash in Nigeria has left international students at Teesside University struggling to afford tuition fees, with some even blocked from their studies and ordered to return home. The manager of Thornaby's Sprouts Community Food Charity spoke to BBC Local Radio and said 75% of their clients were now the struggling students and that it was at maximum capacity. The university itself said it was providing support and that international applicants must provide evidence of sufficient funds when applying for a student visa. Nigeria is currently experiencing its worst economic crisis in a generation. The value of its currency has been depreciating by more than 200% against the dollar. As a result, students at many UK universities have seen savings wiped out and budgets having to be significantly reduced. Some students at Teesside University have complained that the university's decision to change the payment plan and reduce instalments from 7 to 3 have exacerbated issues. The university is offering case-by-case support to those affected. In Northern Ireland, the TES reports that Education Minister Paul Givan has warned schools they must make school uniforms more affordable and that a price cap is being considered. He said the cost of uniform was an unnecessary burden on families by branded clothing and uniforms being available from only one supplier. Mr Givan said proposals due to go out for public consultation this spring will include strengthened guidance on the school uniforms, The decisions came in response to a motion in Stormont on making uniforms affordable. Mr. Givens said school uniforms create a sense of belonging to a school community, but that they should also act to ensure that pupils of all backgrounds feel welcome in the school. He went on to say that while many schools had followed current guidance around value for money, there are other schools which have not, and that this is not a situation which I am going to permit to continue. Further details on the proposals, which could also include the price cap, can be found in TES magazine online. Holiday prices feature in a Schools Week article on criticism faced by holiday company Butlins after it was accused of undermining schools' work to boost attendance. The criticism came after the company advertised term time breaks as great value getaways. The firm offers a 4-night midweek term time break for just under £20 per person, much cheaper than rates during school holidays. Schools Week reporters posed as parents and asked if the holidays were suitable for school-aged children, and were told all breaks are suitable for all ages. Ministers have pushed all year for schools to improve their attendance rates, as persistence absence rates are nearly double pre-pandemic levels. Several multi-academy trust chief executives have commented that marketing holidays which specifically target term time is not civic-minded, but understood the attraction for families struggling to afford a family break, who are being exploited by the companies. Full details of the story are available on Schools Week's website. Finally, aposiopesis was the final word spelled correctly by 12-year-old Bruat Soma to win the 2024 Scripps National Spelling Bee in the USA. Soma takes home a $50,000 prize after spelling 29 words in 90 seconds and getting them all correct. For those of you who are curious, aposiopesis is a term used for the device of suddenly breaking off in speech. An example of this rhetorical device could be "get out or else," with the threat remaining unsaid. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Hello and welcome back. I am here with Bruce Robertson as we talk about the power of codified learning. Now, we've had a really good conversation so far about what learning is, the role of codified learning, and Bruce has shared his experience with his schools and taking those leaders on that journey as well. We're also secretly playing a little game at the moment and said, who said that quote? And I'm still trying to find out who said best bet. So it's definitely going to be one that I'm going to be having a look at after this show and seeing who that's accredited to. But where we've talked about the bigger picture, and we talked about these core concepts of learning, and we talked about daily review in particular and other bits and pieces. I want to go into the techniques, let's call them, those kind of bits and pieces within a lesson that a teacher can come and use and have in their arsenal almost to implement within a classroom. And I wondered what your thoughts are then, Bruce, around those techniques, which ones, how you make sure that teachers have that autonomy and it's not they're stifling that creativity because they've been told that you need to use cold calling in your lesson.
So I don't think any teacher should ever be told that they must use a particular technique. I think what we should be doing is we should be helping teachers to understand what different techniques are, what they look like, some of the detail and the nuance in them, helping them to understand why a particular technique can be useful, and basically just helping them to create their own palette, if you like, one that they can just dip in and out of, and then use effectively in the classroom. Because what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to support all of the young people who we're teaching to learn everything that we're setting out to teach them, and there are techniques that can really help teachers to do that. So cold call is a technique that most teachers probably have heard about cold call. It comes from Doug Lemoff and Teach Like a Champion. When you start to get into the reason for using the technique, well, that's important to understand. Otherwise, you just end up doing it, but you're not maybe using it in the right way because you don't understand what you're trying to achieve. What's the technique trying to achieve? Well, you're trying to get everyone to think about pretty much every question you ask. You're trying to get students to be paying attention. So the idea with cold call, well, if you think about a questioning technique where hands go up, say, so teacher asks a question and then hands go up, and then the teacher only asks students who've put up their hands, there's something of a get out there for students who just decide for whatever reason not to bother thinking about the question because they know that they're not going to be asked unless they put up their hand. So what does cold call do? Well, that encourages everybody to pay attention and it encourages everybody to think because nobody knows who's going to be asked. We're not trying to catch young people out. We're not trying to embarrass them. We're trying to support their learning with the technique. And there's some nuance to the technique, as Doug Lemoff describes it. He would suggest that when cold calls used most effectively, the teacher would ask the question first, what is the capital of Australia? Pause, and then name the student, Marnie, rather than saying, Marnie, what is the capital of Australia? Because doing it the first way by asking the question, pausing it, that encourages everybody to think. So I think that can be really, really useful. So the codifying, well, that's giving the technique a name. And then when we talk about cold call, everybody has an understanding of what we're talking about. And then we can get into the nuance and the specifics of that, like we just talked about. So I think techniques can be, I think they're incredibly useful. And the codifying aspect, really useful. But I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think this should be happening for teachers to be told you must be using a particular technique because that's not preserving autonomy.
I agree. And it's this idea that as a teacher, you want to make that learning visible. So whether it is through a technique as cold calling, or I was in a class today teaching maths, and we were using technology in that way, but it was just standard good teaching and learning. It was just, we just use a different technique to showcase that, and the conversations and the way I could challenge, and it was all questioning really that I was perception there today. But how do you then avoid those lethal mutations? Because there are schools and there are teachers or there are leaders out there that are saying to staff, but you've got to use cold calling. That's something we're all doing. Or you've got to do the count off from 3, 2, 1 and give instructions or other things like that. Is there a place for that at all? And you're alluding to there isn't. But also, like, how do we avoid those lethal mutations? So we have the conversations about those. Okay, here's a key codified learning thing, and here's some techniques that may support that.
So it does come down to leadership, and it does come down to the mindset and the actions of school leaders. If a school leader is observing a lesson and they see that a teacher is asking lots of questions, good. But actually, what tends to be happening is that the most confident students are the ones who are putting up their hands, and these are the only ones who are being asked to answer. Well, then it would be good to get into a conversation about the extent to which the teacher believes all students are actually thinking about each of the questions they're asking. Most teachers would probably accept that the questioning technique as used, hands up and then picking on the students who are putting up their hand, well, that's probably not effective at getting all students to think. And it's certainly not effective at finding out about the thinking of all students. So it's about then getting into the conversation, well, how could the teacher's approach to questioning change so that it does encourage more students to think, so the teacher can find out about the thinking of more students? One technique would be cold call. And the school leader could then, the person observing the lesson could then get into discussion with the teacher about what that technique is, what it looks like. But there are other techniques that we can use. We can use show me boards, for example. We can use chat to a partner, and then we can listen in to conversations. It's not the case that there's only one technique to achieve one thing, to get more students to think, to find out about the thinking of more students. There's a whole palette of techniques that could be used. So what do school leaders need to make sure that they understand? Well, they have to understand the principles that underpin techniques, and then they have to have some knowledge of what the various techniques are so that they can get into conversations with teachers. They have to have a mindset that the discussion about the lesson should be useful to the teacher. That's their job as the school leader, is to get into a conversation that the teacher finds useful, and as a result of the conversation, their teaching practice gets even better than it was. Very difficult, though, if a school leader doesn't have that mindset.
And there we are talking about this mindset change, and I think we could have a whole conversation about the implementation of this and PD, and I want to touch on it a little bit. But where do you start as a leader within a school? Where do you start to go and, let's say you've got this shared language and you've got these principles, you've got these this palette of techniques as well about what learning is and what learning will look like in your school. And you may build that up over time, depending on lots of different factors. But where do you start with that implementation, or where do you start with diagnosing a teacher saying, okay, well, actually, let's start looking at your daily review. Is that the right thing to start at? Or should we look at your explanation and how you're modelling that learning, or sharing it in small steps? So where do you start as a leader in a school?
So we could go back to the lesson evaluation toolkit that we talked about, and that framework that sets out the expectation and the key features that school leaders in their planning and delivery of lessons, and then when they're thinking back over the lessons. Thinking about the lesson evaluation toolkit for Berwickshire High School. Strategies to make everyone think and their thinking visible, e.g. show me boards. Pause, pounce, bounce. That's a technique. Chat to a partner. Think, pair, share. Spotlight assessment activities such as true, false, multiple choice, deliberate mistakes. The EG is really important. You've got this overarching statement, strategies to make everyone think and their thinking visible. That's what you'd like the teacher to consider in their lesson planning. What strategies or techniques are they going to use to make everyone think and their thinking visible? E.g., as we said, show me boards, pause, pounce, bounce. We could put cold call in there, chat to a partner. It's exemplification. Have a think about this. There might be some value in it. It's up to you, ultimately. You're the teacher. Every teacher wants to be teaching effectively. Pretty much every teacher wants to keep making their teaching better and better and better for the reasons that we've talked about. It's the job of the school leader to support them to do that, helping them to understand principles that underpin pedagogical decisions and giving them examples of techniques that they might want to practice getting better at.
And I often use the analogy that as a teacher, you're a conductor of an orchestra.
Yes.
And you've got children and who may be the first chair in a violin or second chair. They may be first chair at the bar section on the trumpet or something else, but you're all working towards that same goal, creating that music, working in harmony, and children will respond in different ways. And I think today, for what you just said there, it's made me think about actually the leaders are also the conductors. Everyone's going to have their individuality, but there is that shared language, that shared music, that shared vision, and here are a few little techniques that you can use and have that empowerment. And I think that, e.g., this is what it could look like. And so do you think then that examples through codification of learning in these examples have actually helped take education research that's sometimes quite heavy, that's sometimes actually quite difficult to read, and now gives us a way for teachers and leaders to implement some of these strategies that have been found over time, especially through cognitive science, into the classroom?
Yes, definitely, because right at the start of our conversation, we were talking about the importance of simplicity and clarity And that's what the lesson evaluation toolkit provides. A double side of A4 with some clear statements, clearly written statements that support teachers to think about specific aspects of pedagogy, that support conversations about those specific aspects. If something didn't appear in there, there's no guarantee that a teacher is going to be thinking about that as they plan a lesson, as they think back over a lesson, as they have a discussion of a lesson. But if it does appear there, it's much more likely that there is going to be consideration, discussion of that. So in that questioning example, the fact that show me boards are there, the fact that pause, pounce, bounce is there. And then, of course, the conversation would be, well, what does pause, pounce, bounce look like? And maybe there's a particular part of it, the pause, that somebody who's been observing a lesson suggests to a teacher. They say, well, do you know what, the pause part, that was great. You were asking lots and lots of questions. But the pause bit, maybe there's something for you to be working on there, because actually what you tended to do was you tended just to ask a student to answer. You were using cold call, but you were just asking a student to answer pretty much straight away. Whereas maybe just to have given 3 seconds, 5 seconds thinking time more often, that would have given more opportunity to students just to think a bit more. Maybe that's something that's worth trying. Now, a teacher will either say, yeah, I think so, or they'll say, well, I'm not sure, because it doesn't really matter how the conversation goes. There's going to be something from the conversation that the teacher says, yeah, actually, I agree with you. That's something I really want to start getting better at. That's something I really need to practice. And then hopefully what the school leader would say would be, well, why don't you do that? And then how about I come back and observe a lesson or a small part of a lesson in a few weeks' time? And if you like, I can really just focus in on that bit, and we can have a chat about how you're doing with that. Most teachers will say, yeah, thank you very much. I'd really appreciate that.
And it's that co-constructed learning together, isn't it? And it's that element of it. And I think there is that time of going in. Do you think there's a time, and I think this will come into my next point I want to make and explore, is how would that look then between novices and experts, teachers who are very new, who in England we've got an ECT program, very heavy in terms of what they go through. And there are lots of providers out there who do some really high quality teaching and learning. And they're putting the cognitive science throughout it. And you're seeing all of these courses that are coming out because of it. But how would you treat them differently to someone who has been a teacher for a long time? And they may even be then reluctant to change because they come out with the phrase, this is the way I've always done it. It works.
Well, I think it's important that we respect experience. I think that is very important. That said, experience and expertise aren't necessarily the same thing. I'm thinking of a quote from a teacher, a head of department in Berwickshire High School, and this teacher is, towards the twilight of their career, and not so long ago said, the best thing that's happened to me as a teacher is to start doing professional reading. My teaching is so much better as a result. I now can't believe some of the things I was doing and not doing previously. He actually finished that with, I don't think I would have employed me 3 years ago. Now, this person had been teaching for 25 years, something like that. So very, very experienced. But actually, their own reflection is they weren't actually as expert as they maybe had thought that they were. And it was only through engagement in professional reading and the key messages from cognitive science and the idea of pedagogies that link to best bets. I mean, that's been an absolute light bulb moment for them. I can think of another teacher, very experienced, who had a conversation with me not so long ago, not a teacher in my own school, just somebody I was presenting at a conference and they were chatting to me. And I'd been talking about cold call. And I'd just been going into the detail of that and the fact that, it's best when you ask the question, you pause and then name the student. And they used the expression light bulb moment. They said, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't realized that. I'd been doing a lot of cold call, but actually I'd just been naming the student first. And he's like, yeah, this is a game changer for me. So these two examples are teachers who are very experienced, but actually there's still a lot to be learned. So it's having respect, I think, for people who are experienced, but it's not confusing that with the fact that they will necessarily be expert in every area.
And I think that's really key. That precision of the codification actually supports that really well, that they won't be an expert in all the areas, but they may have really good relationships with the children are making progress, but there may be something that you explore as a leadership team or work as a school, do some professional development on, and you go into the why in a little bit more detail than you previously would. And yes. I know someone previously who would come and just say, right, there needs to be more AFL, there needs more AFL when talking to other teachers. And it's like, but what does that mean? Why does there need to be AFL? What's going to be the impact of that? And I think we talk about mastery a lot with children, and we talk about how they have to see the variation. There's some really good stuff on variation theory and the desirable difficulties of wow, and look at things in different scenarios. But I don't think we do the same with teachers. It's a hard profession. It's not an easy job to go into, and you are continuously improving. You're continuously got these admin jobs that you've got to do and workload and everything else. But sometimes I don't think we actually just step back a little bit and allow us to be reflective, because we all know lessons that haven't gone well. But you can actually then decipher why it is when you've got like this learning evaluation toolkit. And there are things like that even if we look back at our own practice, we would also, yeah, I've come such a long way. And that light bulb moment for that teacher is brilliant, that they said, I wouldn't have employed myself 3 years ago. Yeah. That's humility, and that's a huge thing to admit to.
Definitely. And it's all about how a school leader conducts themselves. I keep coming back to the lesson evaluation toolkit, but it's such a useful tool. If I'm sitting down with a teacher who's maybe much more experienced than me, I've been working in education just over 20 years, but maybe they've been working in education for 30, 35 years. We'll sit down with the same lesson evaluation toolkit and we'll have a chat about that phrase, talk me through your self-evaluation, and then I'll just chip in. And then very often they'll come to their own conclusions because the toolkit it's guiding their thinking. So actually, the input from me is probably secondary to their own reflections, but hopefully I can still chip in. And I think, yeah, that's a good way to respect the experience of somebody.
And do you think this is a Peps McCree element, and he wrote a book about expert teaching, and he's got 7 levels of professional development. But there are a few things in there that I always go back to and I talk about. And it's this idea that for a teacher to get it, sometimes they've got to see it and own it. And it's that owning it where they understand it inside out and back to front. So how do we you may have these conversations and you may get teachers to try and see a technique and from your conversations, but how would you then support struggling teachers who are still not getting it? And what PD have you done that's really supported them through that process?
So I said at the start of our conversation that one of the first appointments that I made was a principal teacher of pedagogy, somebody who's off timetable for 4 days a week, teaching 1 day a week. So this person in Berwickshire High School is a very good teacher themselves, fully committed to their own professional learning and development, and has great people skills. So he will act as a pedagogical coach. So there are some teachers for whom the conversations like we're talking about with the lesson evaluation toolkit, that's enough. That's enough to keep their practice moving forward. For others, there needs to be a bit more input. Most teachers are really, really receptive to that, so long as it's handled in the right way. and somebody like the principal teacher of pedagogy who's got an awful lot of time available to them to sit down, to have the conversations, to watch lessons, to free the teacher up sometimes to go and observe others. So maybe he will say that actually, if it's questioning technique, let's stick to that they're looking to develop. He'd be able to say, well, actually, it'd be really good if you went and observed this person. And then maybe the teacher says, oh, but I can't because I've looked at the timetable and they're always teaching at the same time as me. And he can say, well, actually, I'm really happy to cover your class for 20 minutes if you just want to go and do that. And then they'd go and do that. And then more often than not, they'll be like, well, I see exactly what you mean. Yeah, I can see exactly what you were doing. And then what he can do is he can come back to observe the teacher and say, well, that's great. Yeah, I really started to see you. I saw how that had changed. Or, yeah, I can see that you've really moved that on a bit, but just keep having a think about this. So the role of school leaders, it's to use their budget in part to support teacher professional development through the appointment of positions like the principal teacher of pedagogy.
We've really come a full circle from our conversation about learning and how our perception of learning has changed, especially with this idea of cognitive science and the fact that we've got a lot more research out there, and this codification has really supported us as teachers and leaders to make a massive impact. And you've shared some wonderful stories tonight about that. But where do you think this is going? What do you think the next steps for education needs to be in terms of teaching and learning? And we live in an interesting time where we've got some really amazing techniques. We've got some really amazing pockets of exceptional practice, but we do have lots of schools that may not have that expertise, that may not have focused on teaching and learning, and the pressures and the challenges that every school do have. Their priorities are slightly different, and I think that's really interesting as well. So where do you think the future of education and this idea of codifying learning could go, or where would you like it to go, and where would you like us to focus on next?
Head teachers, senior leaders, middle leaders, they need to be supported so that they have some good ideas about how they can lead teaching and learning in their school. We've talked about some initiatives that have really, really worked in Berwickshire High School to this point. We've talked about the appointment of the principal teacher of pedagogy. Other schools, they could go down a similar route. I think I've lost count of the number of schools who've got in touch with me, having heard me talk about this previously and say, we've done that, and that's actually been a game changer for us. The development of resources along the lines of the lesson evaluation toolkit. I know of so many schools across the country who've started to use that sort of approach. That the toolkit that they've produced, it's different. It looks different to the one that Berwickshire High School has produced, but they're using it in a very, very similar way. Maybe they'll call it something different, like a lesson evaluation aid memoir. Is what I know one school has called it. Approaches to, investing in a high quality professional reading library for staff, creating professional reading groups and trying to ring fence time for professional reading and discussion. I think that's an important thing to do. Considering how coaching, pedagogical coaching as I call it, instructional coaching as other people call it, considering how that could be used within their school. Berwickshire High, over the past 12 months or so, we've gone down a route whereby every teacher in the school is a coach and every teacher is being coached. And we've trained teachers in pedagogical coaching. And once a term, every teacher has an observation and then a meeting with their coach, 3 times each term. So across about 10 or 11 weeks, there's a 15-minute observation, teacher with their coach, and then a 15-minute discussion of that, and then the reciprocal. So that's an hour in total, teacher with a coach, one person observing, one person coaching, teaching. So that's an hour 3 times a term. So that's 3 hours across about 10 or 11 weeks. We're getting some really, really great feedback from teachers about that. And what we're doing is we're investing an awful lot of time in helping teachers to become better coaches. And the more we continue to invest time in that, the more useful the whole thing will be. So I think these are just some examples of some of the initiatives that I think could really help support schools move forward with teaching and learning development.
And I think one of the things you said in there is that you can take these and make them your own.
Yes.
And I think that's really important as well. And we've come so far in the last few years with teaching and learning and raising those standards. We only have so much time with the children, and we want to be focusing on the right things, the things that we know will make a difference. And I think that's important. And I'm going to play the news in a second, but when the news comes, when we come back from that, I'm going to ask you, what's that one takeaway that you want to give our listeners? And it's almost like, and I'm sorry for making a reference to this, it's like that opening statement the politicians would do when they've got a debate or something. So what's that one thing you want to share out there and inspire teachers around the country to think about, and for them to take away some of the lessons and some that inspiration from tonight's show? So have a think about that, and I'll come back to you in a second. And now we've got some really important sponsors in tonight's show. And one of them is Easy for You. And if you haven't heard, did a live show with them earlier this week, all about the use of how technology can really enhance and support learning. And now, from my perspective, I'm really an advocate for it, but as a tool and as a technique to enhance and showcase pedagogical practices within school. And they're doing some amazing work in that area. And we had a really rich conversation, which you can find over on the Teachers Talk Radio YouTube and also as a podcast.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
So the stage is all yours, Bruce. What's that one thing you want our listeners to take away from this rich and valuable conversation we've had tonight?
I'm going to reshare the quote from the teacher that I referred to earlier. The best thing that's happened to me as a teacher is to start doing professional reading. My teaching is so much better as a result. I now can't believe some of the things I was doing and not doing previously. I actually probably wouldn't have employed myself 3 years ago. It's the importance of professional reading. It's that deep understanding about the key principles from cognitive science about what learning is and how it happens, and the understanding of what the best bets are for pedagogy, all steeped in key messages from educational research. It's professional reading that's the key.
Excellent. And thank you for everyone for listening to Teachers Talk Radio tonight. I hope you really enjoyed this conversation about codifying learning and how we can really improve teaching as well. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us on social media. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. It's on all of the platforms, Spotify, Apple. You can also go to our website, ttradio.org/listen live. My name's been James Radburn, and thank you, Bruce Robson, for what has been a wonderful conversation this evening. Take care, and I hope to see you on the next one.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.